Okay, let's go ahead and see if everything's all good here. Just making sure that everything is running fine here in the live. Let me make sure I've got comments open. Can watch those come in. Okay, let's have a look-see. All right, looks like we are live. So, thank you everybody who is here already. There's only a few of us, so we're not going to get started right away. Just want to make sure that everything's running perfectly fine right now. Okay, everything looks good. All right, perfect. So as everybody is streaming in, as everybody's coming to watch, first of all, I'm going to quickly just let everybody know what's going to happen today. I want to welcome you all to this webinar here on the Profilingua Facebook page. Some of you might recognize me if you watch a couple of the webinars before. I've done a couple already, but those of you who are new here, who have maybe not watched a webinar with us before, I would like to welcome you. You're most welcome to leave your likes. You can leave comments. If you have any questions, anything you want to say, you are absolutely welcome to go ahead and leave them in the comments, and I will get to them as we progress through the webinar. Okay, so just making sure that everything is good on my end. And it looks like it is, so I'm going to get started. So welcome everybody once more. Today I'm going to be sharing with everybody how to stay motivated when learning a foreign language, right? So those of you who follow this page, obviously you probably have some kind of interest in foreign languages to begin with. And of course, I, as a language teacher and also, as a learner of languages myself, oftentimes when I'm learning these languages, it gets to a point where I start to feel very tired, unmotivated. I really love this language. I really want to carry on learning it. But unfortunately, life gets in the way or things get a bit too difficult. It becomes really hard for me to stay committed, to make sure that I don't give up. And I really just want to push myself all the way and make sure that I can do it. But sometimes I just need a little bit of help with that. So throughout my experience and throughout some of the experience of my students, I've gone and I've made a little webinar for all of us to listen to on how we can stay motivated, how we can stay positive, how we can carry on wanting to learn these languages that we've invested so much time into, or if we're going to start learning a language soon, and you just want to make sure that you are in it for the long run, then this is going to be the webinar for you. So I would like to welcome you guys to that. So first of all, I've got a little promotion going on over here. Is of course going to be a moderator in the chat. So for those of you who are watching this webinar, you can get 4 free 45-minute trial lessons using the link below. So the link is on screen now, but the person who is moderating the comments for me will be so nice as to paste it into the comment box as well. So it's easier for you to go ahead and click on. And it can be for any language, so just follow that link. It'll take you to a page. You can fill in some basic details and somebody will get in contact with you to give you this very nice promotional offer. Okay, so I would highly advise it. Here is the link again. If you can find it in the comments, I'll also show it once more before the end of the webinar if anybody misses it. So that's just a little promotion for you guys that you can take advantage of. Right, so first of all, before we start, those of you who haven't watched a webinar of mine before, those of you who may not recognize me, I'm just going to give a quick introduction of myself. So my name is Connor Fenton, and I currently work as a native B2 all the way through to C1 English teacher at Profilingua Kraków. I do some online work for Profi now as well during the summer. insofar as where I was born in South Africa, actually. So you might hear that my accent isn't the stereotypical British accent that you might have come across. But I am a dual national, so I am a UK citizen as well as a South African citizen, and that's because my parents are British, basically, right? So born in South Africa, but because of my parents, I am considered British as well, right? So a little bit complicated, but basically that's all you need to know about where I'm from. So my father is from Scotland as well. So if there are some things that I say in a certain way, it's probably because of that. Some of the words I use and how I use them might also be influenced a little bit by my Scottish father. So be aware of that. But it's very few and far between. You probably won't hear any that you need to pay real attention to. Okay, in terms of my language learning experience, English is my native language, of course. I've been speaking it ever since I was a small child. I also speak 2 languages, Afrikaans and Chinese, fluently. So I have a Chinese degree. I obviously speak Afrikaans very well when I grew up in South Africa. My Polish is getting there. I'm currently on survival level Polish, and it's improving every day, right? So of course I'm using my own tips to stay motivated to learn Polish as well. And then in terms of my teaching experience, I have taught English to second language learners on 3 continents. I've taught in a lot of countries in Southern Africa. I've taught English in China, in Asia, and now I am teaching English here in Europe, in Poland, and in the surrounding areas. We have some students from outside of Poland as well. Cool. So let's go ahead and move on to what we're going to be looking at today. So if we have a look, some of the things I want to talk about today is first and foremost, before I talk about how to stay motivated, we need to look at some of the things that might make it difficult to stay motivated in the first place, right? What are some of the things that can make us feel drained and tired and make us want to give up? We need to see what those are, because if we know what we're dealing with, we know how to make it better, not so. Right. I'm also going to be talking about how to handle learning curves effectively, right? When we're learning languages, if you're not sure what a learning curve is, don't worry, it's very simple. We will get to it very shortly. It'll be the first thing that I talk about after the challenges. I'm going to talk about how to stay motivated when making mistakes, and also how to get over being so shy. And, you know, some of us, when we're learning a new language, it can be embarrassing. We might be scared to say a word here or there, or we might be scared to communicate with somebody just because we don't want to make those mistakes, right? So I also have some tips that we can all use to make us a little bit more comfortable, right? So that when we are learning our language, not only are we, you know, learning it on paper, but we have the confidence and we have the bravery needed to go ahead and speak to people who are speaking the language that we're learning. Okay, outside of that, I also have a couple of useful resources, right? So I have a little couple of websites and things like that that you guys can go to and use. That'll help you stay motivated. So they'll either make it more fun, they will make sure that it doesn't get in the way, they will turn your language learning experience into something that is a great part of your day that doesn't interfere with anything else. I'm just going to give you some of these resources to really allow yourself to grow and learn even more, and to stay motivated, most of all. Okay, and then one of the last things that I want to talk about is going to be balancing language learning with daily life. So I know that a lot of my students especially sometimes come to me and say, Connor, I really want to learn this language. I'm trying very hard. I'm going to lots of classes. I'm doing my best to, you know, memorize words and practice my grammar. But sometimes life just gets in the way, right? So we've all had that before when we're trying to learn a language, we're trying to learn any skill, really, and it just feels like we don't have any time, right? So either we have work, or we have school, or we have to take care of the kids, we have to go out and do the shopping for the week, or we have to prepare dinner for everybody, or there's so many things that can get in the way of it. And I have a couple of tips on how we can take language learning and make sure that it is a part of our day rather than an obstacle in the way of getting everything else done. Right, so those are just some of the things that I would like to talk about today. So let us go ahead and get started. I see some people are already in the chat. Danuta complimenting me on my Polish. Thank you very much. It's always good for the ego to have somebody compliment you on your language. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we? We have some common challenges. Now, these are some of the things that I want to talk about, and these are going to be what really makes it difficult to stay focused on a language, what really makes it tough to, stay motivated, to really want to continue and push through the times that it gets difficult. So let's go ahead and have a look at some of them. So first of all, a language feels too difficult at the start. Now, I'm sure some of you have noticed, whether it's been English, which has been my experience most of all, but if you're learning any language, really, it can be French, Italian, Spanish, you might find that the first couple of months of learning that language feel like hell, right? Because there's so many new things going on. There may be grammar structures that don't exist in your first language. There might be a couple of words that make no sense to you. Maybe there's no matching word in your own language. And very often there is problems with pronunciation, right? So whenever it comes to any of these issues, we might feel like we want to give up straight away, right? We haven't even touched the language yet, and we're already feeling like, oh my goodness, this is too tough. I have no idea what to do. I'm trying really hard, but it doesn't seem to be getting any easier, right? So that is one challenge that a lot of you face. Whenever I'm talking about these, by the way, if anybody feels like they've had these problems, please tell us in the comments, right? Just so I can show everybody, these are real things that people feel, and really, takes the fun out of language learning if they feel like it gets too difficult, right? So we've got a couple tips to deal with that as well. Might feel embarrassed when you make a mistake, or when you end up mumbling over your words when you're talking to somebody. You have a foreign friend who speaks the language that you're learning, and they're trying to have a conversation with you. You can't think of what to say, and you just feel embarrassed, you feel defeated, you have no idea what to do, you have no idea what to say to them. And that feeling can be very, very disheartening, right? It can make us feel very upset and makes us want to give up. But of course, that's just a natural part of learning any language. And there are ways that we can try to, first of all, not make it so embarrassing. And second of all, to just give us the confidence so that we're not even thinking about whether we're making mistakes or not. If we are, we can be corrected. And if not, then we can just enjoy speaking the language, enjoy practicing, and enjoy maybe learning about somebody else or somebody else's culture in the process, right? So that's the beauty of languages. Sometimes when we're learning a language, whether we are, trying to study on our own, or whether we have a certain way of doing it, there might come a time where you feel like other people might like how this is taught or how they would learn this particular language, but it doesn't feel right for me, right? So everybody is different. Everybody is their own person. Maybe not everybody is sure how they should take whatever content they are studying and package it in a way that is easy for them to understand as an individual, right? So of course, I know, for example, when I was learning some of my second and third languages when I was growing up, when I was in school, especially, the teachers would try and teach me something in a certain way. And I felt that I get it, I understand why she's saying this, but if I could just do it my own way, I would feel a little bit more comfortable when doing it, right? So this is a very common thing. And oftentimes when people say this and when people mention to me, Connor, I think that I would like to do this in a certain way, we as teachers can always help guide you in the right direction. But then there are also ways to take that knowledge and to learn it in a way that is more comfortable for you and maybe even a bit more effective. So I have a couple of ways of addressing that later in the webinar as well. So not having time to learn due to work or other responsibilities, right? So I mentioned that a little bit earlier when we talked about balancing life and language learning, right? So of course, just because we want to learn a language doesn't mean life stops. We need to account for that. We need to know that, of course, this is really how it's going to work. But we need to make sure that whenever we are going to learn a language, we find a way to incorporate it or to put it into our lives without making such a big impact, so that we can balance both. We can enjoy both. We can enjoy our life and learn a language at the same time. We have a comment from Alicia. Says, any tips for learning Chinese? I have a couple of tips for learning Chinese, actually. I think, first of all, it would be easiest to just watch a few YouTube videos on the very basics, right? So those normally teach you on how to pronounce things, because you guys will all know Chinese has characters rather than ABC, the letters that we are used to. There's a certain way of reading them using the Latin alphabet, which might be a bit easier for people to start with. It's called pinyin. And also, in some of the resources I'm going to give a bit later, there will be some websites that will probably already have some content to try for complete beginners, right? So later on, I'll be talking about some websites that we can use, not just for English, but for all languages. And I would encourage you to go there, and that would be a good start. So thanks for the question, Alicia. Look forward to the end of the webinar where I have the resources, and maybe it will help you out over there. So another thing that might be challenging when we're learning a language is getting to a certain point and not being able to advance further, right? So I've had some B1, B2 students of mine in the past come to me and say, Connor, I understand this, and I understand where we're going. I understand when people are speaking to me, and whenever we come to class, I can get good grades and I can pass the tests. But I feel like my English is not improving past this certain point, right? So you maybe didn't struggle so much at the beginning, you managed to learn, but things are getting so difficult randomly halfway through or 3/4 of the way through that it can feel a little bit disheartening. You feel quite sad, you know, I've worked so hard on this already, why can't I go any further, right? So this is a common one that I get as well. I had this with Chinese at one point as well. So it definitely is a challenge that we all face to our motivation whenever we're learning a language. But I also have a couple of remedies and some tips for that. And then the last thing that I want to talk about as well, another common challenge that language learners will face, is that they struggle to communicate with natives or advanced speakers, right? So oftentimes whenever we start our language learning journey, we start with a friend, or we start in a class, right? And studying in a class is very comfortable because you know that the people around you are also there to learn. Everybody understands each other. There's no judgments. Everybody is there to do the same thing, and you can enjoy the process together. And of course, that's great. It's definitely how I would prefer to start learning a language. But as well, whenever somebody gets to a certain level and they maybe want to start communicating with a native friend they have, or maybe they have a friend who speaks the language much better than they do, and whenever they try to communicate with them, it just feels like it's two complete universes, right? It feels like their level is so high, my level is so low. You know, I feel so bad about myself. How can they be so good at the language? I'm not so good yet. Of course, this is one thing that can work on our self-esteem a little bit as well when we're dealing with foreign languages. So it's something that we need to keep in mind. And also, I have a couple of things that we can look at to remedy that as well. So those are some of the common challenges that we face, and were some of the reasons why we might get demotivated when we're learning a foreign language. And I'm going to be talking about the solutions very shortly. So let's go ahead and have a look at the first thing I want to talk about is learning curves, right? So when we look at a learning curve, right, curve, very easy to understand. We've just got these lines, right? So you'll see that this curves up, and then it goes up here, starts curving down, right? So these are what we call learning curves. Basically, some languages are very easy to learn at the beginning, right? So if we go ahead and have a look at this, you see that we're doing very well very quickly. Our performance is getting much higher. The things we can say, the things we can understand, they get really good really fast, right? And this is very encouraging at the beginning, because you might start learning a language and within, you know, a month, 2 months, you've already learned how to have basic conversations. You might have learned a few grammar structures here that are, you know, very useful. You maybe even know a few idioms or something like that. You can really motivate yourself by thinking, wow, this language isn't so difficult after all. I've learned so much in such a short time. That one has a very quick learning curve like that. My performance is getting very good very quickly, right? And that's very good for us. But the opposite can happen as well, right? So sometimes when we start learning a language, things are very difficult at the beginning, especially. Right? So this is very common when you are learning a language that's not from your language family. So to give you an example, I, as an English-speaking person, don't find it very difficult to learn Spanish or French or German even, for example, right? Because generally these languages are close enough. They both have Latin influence. When it comes to Germany or to German, they're both Germanic languages, just like English is. So generally, it's easier for me to start learning those languages, and I'll probably make a lot of progress quite quickly. But if I, as an English speaker, were to start learning Polish, for example, as a Slavic language, or learning an Asian language, because there's not so much in common on the very base level with these languages, it can feel like the start is the most difficult part, right? So that would be what we call a steep learning curve, or when it takes a while for things to get easier, right? So there might be a long time when things are a bit difficult. Now, learning curves, when I say that, you might think that, oh, but then I just won't learn the languages that have the difficult learning curves. What's nice about the tough learning curves is even though they are very difficult at the beginning, you will find that after you manage to get past those few things at the beginning that were so tough, let's say, for example, when I started to learn Polish, the fact of remembering whether items are male or female, for example, which is not a English concept at all. You know, it took a while for me to get a hold of that. It's a completely new idea I need to think of. But once I understand that, it makes everything else a lot easier. Okay, so again, the opposite might be true, for example, for somebody who's learning English and is not so used to having so many tenses, for example, and how they're all used. Learning those might become a bit difficult at the beginning, but afterwards, once your tenses are down, becomes a lot easier to form other sentences entirely, right? So basically what I'm trying to say is, yes, if you have a learning curve that is good for you and you make a lot of progress very quickly, then of course it's great, right? So do your best to enjoy that first little part where everything is going well so quickly, but then of course the difficult part might come later. But also, if you're going to be learning a language where the most difficult stuff comes first, right? Things that maybe you're not so familiar with, a completely different language family that maybe uses a whole different writing system or grammatical points, that kind of thing. Remember that even though it's tough and even though it might feel like it's never going to get easier, I promise you it will, right? So it's just a matter of putting aside those 2 or 3 months, say, okay, I know these 2 or 3 months at the beginning of this language are going to be very difficult, but I also know that after that, it's going to be a lot better and things are going to go smoother, right? So just keep reminding yourself that sure, it's difficult, it'll get easier afterwards, right? That'll help you keep the motivation to push through that very difficult stuff at the beginning. And then afterwards, when that's done, you'll be able to more effectively enjoy the language as learning it becomes a little bit easier. Okay, so that's just a little bit on learning curves. And I definitely think that it is something that everybody can learn something from. Also, know your learning curve of the language you're going to start learning before you start it, right? So check, for example, is whatever language difficult to learn for an English speaker, for example? See what people are saying about it so you can prepare yourself mentally for how the curve is going to look. Right? It's going to help you plan ahead and maybe not feel so upset if things don't advance so quickly. Right, let's go ahead and move on. So the next thing I want to talk about over here is going to be feeling shy or embarrassed to speak. So, luckily, as I've been teaching in Europe, especially towards the higher levels, a lot of my students don't seem to have this problem. But I know especially around A1, A2, maybe even a bit of B1, especially at the beginning when you're learning a new language, you might feel like whenever you try to say something, there's this feeling of shame that you said something wrong. You're worried that people are going to laugh at you if you say something incorrectly. If you use an incorrect grammar structure, you feel ashamed again that you should know it and you made a mistake in front of everybody. This is a very good one that I think we could all look at, right? So I think that when it comes to feeling shy or embarrassed to speak, I have a couple of things that I want to share here that might be a little bit more useful when it comes to figuring that out. We have a comment here from Anya Lisek. She says, the example is not fully good. English-speaking person would be able to learn German and other Germanic languages easier than Slavic language, but Spanish can also be hard for English speakers. So yes, of course, I agree with you. So of course, when it comes to English-speaking people learning German, for example, both being Germanic languages, much easier than Slavic, but it's not always true the other way around, as Anya is saying, right? So I'm glad you left this comment, some extra context for everybody, right? So while it might be easy for an English speaker to learn Spanish, the reverse isn't always true. Right, so I hope that everybody can keep that in mind as well. Thank you, Anya, for that comment. I really appreciate it. So again, just make sure that when you're trying to figure out which learning curve is going to be hitting you when you start learning a new language, always check, right? If I'm speaking whatever language as my native language and I'm going to learn another one, you can of course go ahead and do some quick research, maybe 5 minutes, try to get a gauge of how difficult it might be at the beginning and how easy it might become afterwards. So thank you, Anya, for your comment. Right, so back to feeling shy or embarrassed to speak. So how can we deal with this, right? How can we take away that shame, or more specifically, that loss of motivation we might feel whenever we make mistakes? So let's go ahead and have a look at it. Now, one of the first things I would recommend is that you communicate with other people who are learning the same language as you, right? So if you're going to be studying a language of some sort, whether you're going to be having classes with us or you're just going to be having classes in general, whether you just have a little study group that you joined, maybe of some mutual friends that have all decided to learn a language together, I think it's a very good idea to practice with each other, right? So of course, this takes away the pressure of having people, listen to you, and you might be scared of speaking in front of, very advanced speakers or natives. Because of course, everybody is learning, everybody is human, everybody is going to make mistakes in the group. And I feel like this security of knowing that nobody is going to say something, or, you can all correct each other in a friendly, safe environment where you don't have to worry about being judged, is very good for building your confidence when you speak. And I think that that's always a fantastic idea and one place where you could start. So before you even start talking to natives or speaking with advanced learners, do go ahead and spend some time with others who are learning the language, and it will help to boost that confidence. Also, if you cannot, or if you're not having a class, then you can always go ahead and find other learners online that maybe you can have a little bit of an interaction with. So you're also welcome to go ahead and stay for the resources at the end, where I have a few forums and some ideas on where you might find others who are learning the language that you are learning. Right. So if, for example, you want to also build some confidence when you're going to speak, if you have set plans, if you're going to go out and do something specific, let's say you need to go to the bank, or you're going to meet a friend and you know that you're going to talk about computers or something like that, whatever it is, if you know that generally what's going to happen in the situation, you can always just do very quick revision on some of the vocabulary you already know, just so that you can feel prepared, right? I'm not saying study for every interaction you're going to have, because let's face it, that's not practical. But at the same time, just be having that security that, okay, I just made sure I know what I'm going to say for these particular words. It makes you feel more confident and makes you feel like you have everything in place, so that when you do meet this person, or when you do go and do whatever it is that you wanted to do that day, you don't have to always fret and worry that, oh my goodness, I can't remember this word. You just have more confidence because you just prepared for it in advance, right? And since you have more confidence, since you are feeling better about yourself, you won't make those mistakes, right? Because you did that little preparation before you went out. Okay, and of course, learning a language is all about trying to improve every day. But when it comes to speaking practice, especially, I would say keep things simple, right? Because when you keep things simple when you speak, it allows you to make sure that the conversation doesn't randomly go off into space, into some of the most difficult conversational topics that there could be, right? So again, if you, for example, are, B1 level or something like that, you're meeting a friend and you would like to have a conversation with them, stick to what you know, right? So just because let's say maybe not as many words or phrases as a full native does, doesn't mean that you can't talk about things in an interesting way, right? So of the things that you're going to talk about, just try to simplify them. You don't have to always try to impress somebody with the fanciest words or with the fanciest phrases and idioms that your teacher mentioned to you once. that time will come, right? But when you're practicing speaking and when you want to stay motivated, when you want to make sure that you don't feel shy or you don't feel embarrassed, keep it simple then. And as your confidence increases, as your proficiency increases, as you become more fluent, then you can start to throw everything else in there because it will feel more natural. You won't have to worry about making any mistakes or that kind of stuff. And then the last thing that I would recommend if you are a person who might get embarrassed or feel shy when speaking is ask questions, right? So if you ask somebody questions, first of all, right, it's quite polite. You can ask how they are, you can ask how things are going for them. But at the same time, it also allows you to make sure you know where the conversation is going, right? If you're the one who's answering the questions, you're kind of setting the topic for what's going to be talked about. Now, of course, this helps you to stay within the realm of things that you already know and things that you can speak about comfortably and that you won't feel so nervous about when speaking. But at the same time, you can also learn a little bit more about how you're or about who you're talking to, right? So if you're going to go ahead and ask somebody a lot of questions, then you make it feel quite flattering. They think, all right, this person wants to know a lot about me. It's both polite and also allows you to make sure that the environment and the topics that are going to be discussed suit you and that you can feel comfortable when you're communicating with this person, right? So these are some of the things I would recommend to kick away that feeling of shyness or nervousness. And if you don't feel shy, and if you don't feel embarrassed when speaking, it's a lot easier to stay motivated, right? You won't feel so bad after you make a little mistake or something like that, right? So let's go ahead and have a look at some other things I wanted to talk about. So this is quite a big one, and one that, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of my students, especially my adult students, come to me and they mention is that whenever they are trying to learn a language, so whether they come to my classes, whether they are studying on their own on the weekends, if they have a little study group or something like that, 9 times out of 10, they will always mention that one of the toughest things for them is trying to find time for learning the language, or rather not having this language learning interfere with the rest of the things that they have to do in their lives. Okay, so since this is quite a big one, I've gone and prepared a couple of things. I have another slide worth of these that I want to talk about. And these will most certainly help you balance your life and your language learning in such a way that you can do both without either getting in the way of the other. So for many of us, we want to learn languages, but it feels like life gets in the way. There are a couple of things that we can do to balance the two. So the first one, which I really like, and it's one that I would absolutely recommend, it's probably my biggest recommendation. It's one that I try to always tell to myself whenever I'm feeling a little bit demotivated about learning a language, is to be disciplined, but flexible, right? So what do I mean by that? If I say be disciplined, I'm basically saying that you should do your best to tell yourself that you need to study, right? So it's not about, yeah, I'll study whenever I get the chance. No, right? You want to be serious about the language. You should tell yourself, I'm going to do it at least so many times a week for how long? Okay, you at least give yourself this idea generally of how often you want to do this. But we also need to understand that life happens. So when I say be flexible, tell yourself that you have a routine, that you're going to do your best to study, that if nothing happens, I am going to promise myself that I'm going to set this time aside for my language learning. But if something happens, it's okay. That's life. Things happen. You needed to go to the doctor. You needed to, I don't know, pick your kids up from school a bit later that day. You needed to have a guest over who was helping you with something. I understand, it all happens. If those things happen, do not beat yourself up about it, right? What do I mean by that? Don't make yourself feel upset. Okay, so sometimes when we put aside a little routine for ourselves to learn and we say, okay, I'm going to learn every Friday for so many hours or something like that, and for whatever reason we miss it, we feel very guilty and we think, oh, I can't believe I missed that time. I set that time aside especially and I still couldn't do it. Oh no, I might as well just quit now. I can't even commit to one small routine. Don't let yourself get into that cycle of blaming yourself, right? Do your best to be disciplined. Do your best to say, all right, I have these times and I'm going to learn these times. But if something happens, just accept that they did and try to carry on with the routine as best as you possibly can afterwards, right? This is probably the best way that you can make sure that you don't get demotivated, and that you can ensure that you don't end up feeling like you want to give up just because you missed a certain appointment for learning or anything like that. Okay, something else that I would like to recommend, which is a big one and often one that's quite easy to do, considering, we have access to a lot of interesting resources on the internet, and, a lot of us live in cities where we might be able to, speak to foreign friends and all that. So here's another suggestion. Find ways to introduce your new language into the time between responsibilities. Okay, so we have responsibilities every day. We have school, we have work, we have things to do. We always do. But you will notice that there's always a little bit of time in between them somehow, where we are doing something, sure, but that we could try and fit our language in there, right? So the obvious example is if you have a job that involves driving to and from it every day, you have this whole drive of you either just listening to the radio or listening to the same song on Spotify that you've heard 5 million times. Or you could listen to a podcast in the language that you're learning, maybe one especially for language learning. If, for example, you work in a company where you might have a few foreign co-workers, for example, oftentimes everybody needs to have coffee and lunch, right? Maybe you like to have coffee and lunch by yourself, or you always hang out with the same friend at work or something like that. Why not have a coffee with the foreign friend and practice your language with them, right? Practice your second language with them. I'm sure they wouldn't mind. I'm sure they would even feel quite flattered and quite honored to try and teach you, right? Everybody always has this sense of happiness and pride that they might feel if somebody is trying to learn the language that they speak, right? So I would recommend these kinds of things as well. Now, you'll see in both of these examples, you manage to always find time in between these responsibilities to do things, and these small periods of time add up. If you at least do it for half an hour every day, driving to and from work or having lunch, those half an hours over time add up, and you might end up spending hundreds of hours learning this language when you might just have been doing something else entirely, right? So that's another way that you can make sure that English is always, or whichever language it is you're learning, is always going to be a part of your day no matter what. Okay. This is a very important one as well, though. So for those of you who work, or those of you who go to university, especially those of you who have quite busy days in general, if you're interested, have classes after days that won't be too busy at work. Okay, so this is very important. For those of us who work long hours, those of you guys who maybe have a lot to do at uni, if you are writing a thesis or something like that, right? We all have these big responsibilities that take up most of our day. Try to have your classes on the days that you won't be so busy, right? So in my experience, when I've been working, and in the experience of a lot of my students, they might say that, oh, Mondays and Tuesdays and Thursdays are the worst, Wednesdays and Fridays aren't so bad. If you know that, try to put your classes on those days that are not so bad. Why do I say so, right? Because if you've gone and you just spent a whole day at work, you've been trying so hard to just go ahead and get everything done, you're feeling low on energy, you're feeling very demotivated already before you've started learning, it really doesn't set the stage for a good lesson if you're already tired before you begin. Right, so one of the ways that you can counteract that is just by having classes and doing the majority of your studying on the days that are not so busy, right? Because then you will at least still be a bit fresh, and you will still have some energy afterwards to do your learning over there, right? This is already after you've included it in between other duties throughout the day. So you might even be ready with a couple of examples floating around your head that maybe you would like to share with your teacher or with your classmates and all these kinds of people as well. Right, so let's go ahead and have a look at this one as well. So if you are learning in a group or learning in a class, of course, these will be the first people that you're going to be bouncing your ideas off of, correct? But of course, maybe you're the kind of person who prefers to learn alone, or you're having individual classes and you can only contact your teacher at certain times. If that's the case, then ask your family or somebody you live with, right? So maybe you live with roommates or somebody like that, to occasionally ask you questions about what you've learned. Okay, so this is important. They don't have to even speak the language that you're learning, right? So they don't have to, test your knowledge, for example. That's not what they're there for. Okay, so instead ask these people to say, hey, let's assume your name is Ben. Hey, Ben, what did you learn in English yesterday? And can you please explain it to me? right? So just have them ask you a couple of questions like this so that they can catch you. If, for example, you haven't been thinking about it for a little while, them asking you will suddenly put your brain back into this mode of that language and have you quickly think and revise something that you learned recently. Okay, so of course, when you do this, maybe you'll be able to remember some new vocabulary you've learned, right? Maybe there was a grammar structure or two that they ask you to explain. Because they make you think about it, it comes back in and you can process it once more. And the best part about it is if you have to teach somebody something that they ask you, right? So they teach you to, or they ask you to explain a certain word or to teach them a certain grammar point. The whole process of you teaching them that is basically you practicing it as well, right? Because again, to teach something is basically you have to be well practiced in it. You have to be quite good in it. And the more often you teach something, the more often you have to think about how it works, how I do it. Is everything okay down here? Am I really certain I know how this works? Am I familiar with all the ins and outs of this grammar point or this piece of vocabulary? Very important. Okay, so the process of you teaching it to somebody can really help to solidify or to, put into the back of your brain everything you've learned and really make sure that it doesn't go anywhere. Okay, so that is a little bit of an introduction on how you might balance language learning and your daily life. So I hope some of those tips have been quite useful. Now, I have a couple of resources as well that I wanted to share. So I think I mentioned it to Alicia earlier from the comments. So Alicia, if you're still watching, maybe you'll be able to catch some of them over here. Now, basically, very fortunately, we live in the internet age where we can get a whole bunch of resources and things to help us study very easily, right? So I've collected a couple over here that I would recommend to you guys to stay motivated when you're learning your languages, as well as trying to find ways to, let's say, if you want to ask a couple of questions, if you need clarification on any grammar point or piece of vocabulary, and you maybe can't contact your teacher or your classmates right away, I think these things will help you very much. So I've compiled a little list of some of them for you. Now, luckily, we have all of these resources available to us. And the first thing that I would recommend that has been particularly helpful in my personal case, so I will recommend you this one from absolute personal experience, is that you should visit some language learning forums and ask questions, right? So forums, again, are basically websites where people can ask questions about anything. Of course, you'll be going to the language learning ones, so they will be about languages. And you can just ask, hey, I don't understand how to use the word dissolve in English, for example. Okay, what kinds of things can dissolve? I'm not entirely sure, right? Of course, you could ask this to your teacher when you have class, but sometimes we all have that experience. We want to know straight away so that we can finish whatever it is we're doing. You go ahead, you pop that on the forum, and then people who have experience learning languages or people who speak the languages that you're trying to learn can help you straight away. They can go ahead and type some answers in there for you. Okay, so they give you advice on how to study, but also since this is a forum full of people who really love languages and learn languages and teach languages, either for a living or just as a hobby, there's also a bunch of people in there that you can make friends with, that you can chat to, that can maybe give you some advice other than just grammar and vocabulary. They might be able to also give you some motivational advice on how to stay positive, how to continue learning something. I would highly recommend them. Some good examples of forum.languagelearners.org. Okay, so this is quite an old one. It's been around for many years. But it at least has very many users as well, which will probably make it a bit better if you want a quick response. Websites like Reddit, for example, which is just a glorified thread. You could look for the English language subreddit, or you could look for the French language subreddit. You could look for the Spanish language subreddit. And whenever you go to these places, you'll find a lot of other people asking questions about certain points in the language. So you could go ahead and learn from them. Or if you have your own question that you would like answered, you can go ahead and create a free account. You can post it in there. And then whenever somebody else comes to the forum, they see your question, they can answer it for you, and they can try and give you the best advice possible, right? So these are some of the things forum-wise that I would recommend to you guys if you would like some extra resources for learning a language. Now, another thing that I would like to recommend that I do with my students, especially for revision. So if any of my students are watching, you guys will know exactly what I'm talking about. there are a lot of what is commonly known as language game websites. Okay, so they basically take language learning into simple but effective games, right? So I don't know how you guys feel about it. Maybe you are more logical and you prefer just to read things and you prefer just, learning from a textbook or something like that. But I'm sure for the majority of us, we like our language learning experience to be fun, right? We enjoy and stay motivated when whatever it is we're doing or whatever it is we're trying to learn is a fun process. Right. So with that, these language game websites have become these, interesting interactive games that you can play and you can compete with others. Oftentimes when I play these with some of my students, it's quite fun because everybody tries to get the high score and all that. They try to compete with each other while at the same time being able to practice their language abilities and all that. I think it's a very good idea. So this way, you're not only studying, but since you're doing it in an enjoyable way, you are motivated, you are feeling happy, you're enjoying the process rather than just, doing whatever and hoping that you get better over time. Right. So, of course, the obvious examples for this would be websites like WordWall, Kahoot, these kinds of things. Now, of course, if you guys have ever used either of these before, you'll know that your teacher, for example, can make you little quizzes that you can play. But even if you don't have a teacher who creates these for you, then there's already lots of content on these websites that you can just find, right? So say, for example, you're not so sure how to do narrative tenses, for example, in English, right? You just go to one of these websites and you type English narrative tenses, and then a whole bunch of activities that other people have made come up, and you can play those, you can practice those as well. Okay, so it doesn't even depend on having a teacher or a guide or whoever make them for you. You can just go ahead and access them straight away as well. Right. And then, of course, general planning apps, right? So again, I said about being disciplined and flexible, right? Of course, to be disciplined means that your life needs to be a little bit organized to begin with, right? Those of you who are watching here who are interested in language, I would assume most of you guys are organized anyway, but I'm pretty sure I have something over here that can make your lives even more organized than that. So basically, of course, when we are planning our day, we need to factor our language learning into it. And if we can plan our day properly, so as our language learning is a part of our day, rather than something that is, let's interrupting the rest of our day, as it can sometimes feel like, it's going to feel like a much more natural process. We're not going to get so upset if we realize that, oh, I didn't do my English today. If it's in the planner, you will remember it. So once it's routine, you'll never feel like it's a chore. You'll never feel like it's boring. Okay, if you get used to having your second language learning period, let's say every Tuesday and Wednesday at 6 p.m. and no matter what, that's when I'm going to learn. If you get used to having this routine and it's there for you, it's always going to be a lot easier. You're not going to feel like you always have to find time for it, right? Now, a couple of things that I would recommend for you guys for that would be websites like Trello and Evernote. Okay, so these are just, again, general planning apps. I would advise that you use these, of course, for language learning. That'll help you, get everything organized. If you're organized, it's a lot easier to do. It's easier to stay motivated if you know what's going to be happening. But at the same time, just aside from your language learning, if the rest of your life is quite organized and going quite smoothly, then it's not such a stretch of the imagination to assume that your language learning would be going well as well. So let's go ahead and have a look at one of the last things that I want to talk about. So just travel as well, right? Now, of course, it's a lot easier said than done, right? I'm living in the same coronavirus-ridden world as all of you are. So please don't misunderstand me when I say just travel. Okay, I understand the difficulties that all of us face currently when it comes to traveling to and from places. But fortunately, we're all getting vaccinated. Tests are more available. A lot of the countries' borders are making it easier, especially in the EU and in the general area of Europe. It's becoming a lot easier to move around. So that's good news for all of us. Hopefully our travel plans can start getting back to normal sometime soon. So I'm going to mention over here, if any of you guys have any travel plans or are hoping to travel quite soon, you would be surprised on the very positive impact this could have on your language learning as well. So Of course, if you go to the country or you go to a country where a lot of the people end up speaking the language that you're learning, it can be great for immersion, right? So again, immersion is completely putting yourself in a situation where you are surrounded by the language. Everywhere you look, all of the signs are in this language. When you hear people speaking on the street, they're speaking this language. You would be surprised how much your brain can actually suck out of everything that's around you if you just give it the opportunity. So, of course, traveling also involves big expenses, of course, but even if you're on a tight budget, even if you don't have a lot of money to spend, you can still have a great time. And of course, you can practice your second language in a new environment. Okay, so whether you are spending the most money in the world and staying in a 5-star hotel with fancy meals all the time, or if you're just going to stay in a hostel with your backpack, it doesn't matter. Both of these situations are very good for putting yourself in a new environment and forcing yourself to practice this new language that you are learning. Okay, so when you are there, it's a good motivator, because if you don't practice what you're learning, and if you don't try and put whatever you've learned into practice, things might be a little bit difficult for you, right? So there is a healthy amount of pressure, I would say, when you are in a country in a language that you're learning, because not only is everything around you going to be in this language, but for your own convenience, you will need to go ahead and speak a lot of it as well. And that'll end up motivating you to get better as quickly as possible and to try and exercise some of the things that you've learned in the past. Okay, you would be surprised really just how much you can learn from having this language all around you. I very much highly recommend it. Okay, so of course, this is not just going to the UK or to the US, these majority English-speaking countries as well. But of course, when it comes to English specifically, you could go to other countries where a lot of the population speaks English to begin with, right? So the Nordic countries, a lot of people speak English there. There are a couple of other countries in Europe like that as well, right? If, for example, you know that you're going to go to Austria or these kinds of places, right, and you're learning German, that's also a good opportunity for you to practice it. So again, you don't have to go to the exact country where the language is from, but just generally a country that has this influence would be good for this kind of thing, right? But of course, if traveling is out of the question for the time being, either due to COVID restrictions, or maybe you've just been on holiday, you need to save up some money for the next one, or whatever the reason it is that you can't go traveling right now, try to find TV series, movies, YouTube videos, music, all of these kinds of things in your target language or in the language that you are learning, and you can just completely go ahead and, again, immerse yourself and put yourself completely into all of this different content, right? Try to listen to Italian music and watch Italian TV if you're learning Italian. Try to watch let's say YouTube videos in German if you're trying to learn German. Try to force yourself to consume this kind of media, right? Because realistically, different kinds of media, TV, movies, music, all that kind of stuff is basically just how those people interpret the world in that language anyway, right? So even if you're not physically in this place that you would like to go to, listening and watching some of the things that people from there would watch or would listen to is probably as good of a replacement as you're probably going to get to this. Because again, it's all natural, and you can try to learn exactly how people might interact with each other, how things might sound, how things are pronounced, the words they use, the grammar, the slang as well, a very important one, right? I know a lot of people end up learning a lot of UK slang from watching British TV, for example, right? So there are a whole bunch of opportunities to learn so much just from listening to these few pieces of media from a different country. Okay, so again, you have access to a whole nother language, and the best part is you don't even need to leave your home to do any of this. You can put yourself in an entirely different world, and you didn't even have to leave the comfort of your own couch, right? So this is another way that one might do so. Right, so most importantly and lastly, do what works for you. So using some of what we learned today, you can piece together a plan that works for you. And of course, the secret to success when learning a language is to do it in a way that plays to your strengths. So we've talked about a whole different bunch of things today, whether it was balancing it between, life and language learning, feeling shy, if there are any other problems as well. You might have had, let's say, difficulty trying to practice or something like that, I've given you guys some tips. Everything that I've told you today, and then of course your own experience as well, try to go ahead and slap them together in such a way that you find a language learning method that really works for you. Okay, so knowledge of your learning curves and everything will help as well. So again, if there's a language that you want to learn, steep learning curve, know that it's going to be tough at the beginning, but you'll get through it. Maybe you're somebody who is shy when they need to speak in a language that they're learning, it's fine. Try to use some of the tips we talked about today to get over it and become a little bit more of a confident speaker. And once you become a bit more confident, it becomes a lot easier to grow afterwards. Right? Again, as you become more confident, it becomes a lot easier to share with others, to enjoy different media, like we were just talking about. You can go travel to these countries with a feeling of security that you at least know how to do the basics and that nothing will end up being too difficult. There's always that to look forward to. And I hope that even just with some of the tips and tricks that I've given you today, or if you have any others as well, which you can leave in the comments, we'd be very happy to hear from you, and so would everybody else watching. I hope that with all of these combination of tips and tricks, pieces of advice, you guys will never lose the motivation to become truly bilingual, or perhaps even more, right? Some of you might even speak 3 or more languages, in which case I'm very impressed. It's always a very impressive feat to be able to speak so many languages. So maybe you guys would like to share, those of you who are live with us, or even if you're watching the VOD of this, you're watching the playback video, you're more than welcome to leave comments on that as well. The comments aren't just open during the live section of this. So I would like to hear what your experience of learning a second language has been like, right? So is there anything that maybe matched what I said today, or maybe they had your own personal experience that you think people could learn from as well, right? Okay, I'm not 100% right on everything, and of course, everybody has their own experience. So we would like to welcome you in this community to share with us, and we can all end up learning together. Okay, so share in the comments. We'll go ahead and pin some of the comments as well if you guys have anything you want to say about that. Okay. And just one more time as well, here in the comments section, I should have a moderator who's gone and put it in over there. If not, I'll go ahead and paste it at the end of the lesson. If not, you can just type it in directly into the search bar, but that'll also be a little bit inconvenient. I'll just go ahead and post the link for you guys if the moderator doesn't do it at the end of the stream. So again, you follow the link, it'll open up a little page, and you can get for free a 45-minute trial lessons using the link below. I know the stream is in English, but again, one more time, I must mention it's not just for English. You can do it in a language of your choice, right? When somebody contacts you, I think it's a very good little test to see if there's anything that you would like to learn. And you can go ahead and give it a try before you get started, right? See how the learning curve is at the beginning and all of this. Right, so I would very much recommend that you guys go ahead and do that. So with that, I would like to open up the last, we only have like 2 minutes or so. I would like to open the field for some questions and answers over here. So I'm going to leave the questions and answers open for another 2 minutes. We still have a couple of viewers in the chat. Would anybody like to ask any questions or make any comments about our webinar today? It can be either about what I talked about, staying motivated when learning English. It can be about me. It can be about the school as well. Maybe you have a couple of questions about, you know, our school Profilingua. Please do go ahead and answer it. If I can't answer it straight away, the moderator is there to help you as well. And for the rest of us, I would like to go ahead and hear from you and see if you have any other comments on what we did today. So again, if you send the question, please do be advised that I will probably get it maybe 20 seconds after you send it, just because there's the delay in the stream, but I promise I will get around to it. In the meantime, while I wait for those, just going back one piece over here to Alicia's question it was earlier, any tips for learning Chinese? So I mentioned to her that some of the resources that I was going to post would be useful as well. So especially when it comes to Chinese learning on Reddit as well, I believe there's a very good forum for that. And then, of course, whenever you want to play these games as well are very good. So WordWalk, Kahoot, all of these different services, you go on and you type basic Chinese and that kind of stuff. There will already be a lot of very cool activities prepared by some Chinese teachers at the very, very basic level, that even if you've never seen and tried to learn Chinese before in your life, there will always be something over there which can aid you in that. So I would very much recommend going to do it. And as for one last tip as well, I would recommend trying to watch very basic YouTube videos as well on Chinese. So you get a lot of very basic English language materials. I'm not so sure about Polish or any other European language. In my experience, when I was learning Chinese, a lot of the videos I watched were in English, but they were very good, very useful. There's a channel called Shuo Chinese that is very good. I think there's Grace Chinese or something like that. I would recommend them. I can't think of the exact names off the top of my head, but please do go ahead and have a look at those. They would be very useful. Okay, and then just want to comment one more time again on what Anya posted earlier. She's very right. So again, just keep in mind that while it might be easier for a person who speaks one language to begin learning another, the reverse isn't always true, right? So I have a lot of my friends, for example, who have tried learning Chinese. They might say that Chinese isn't so difficult once you get past, the characters and all that kind of stuff. But I have a lot of my Chinese friends and some of my students in the past when I was teaching in China who mentioned to me that English tenses are almost impossible for them, right? So again, there's not always the same level of difficulty, and the same things are not so difficult whenever you learn languages. So depending in which direction you're going, it might actually make a big impact on how difficult the course might feel. Okay, so we've got another couple seconds or so. Does anybody maybe want to leave a quick last minute question? If not, then I am going to get ready to end the stream. Thank you everybody for coming. I see the moderator has kindly put the link to the promotion in the comments section. So I would welcome you all, those who are watching or those who will watch the VOD later, to go ahead and sign up. It's a great deal and a nice little free promotion for you guys. I would highly recommend it. And yeah, so that's all from me for today from Profilingua here. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope that you all picked up a couple of tips over here on how to stay motivated when learning a foreign language. Thank you everybody who popped in during the stream, those of you who watched to the end, and even those of you who just popped in for a minute or two to say hi and just to see what's going on. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys all for supporting the stream and for liking the page. You're welcome to send this around. You're welcome to leave your comments and suggestions in the comment section below. And thank you everybody once again for coming. My name is Connor. I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and I will see you guys next time. See you all.